Okay, welcome to another short revision video. This time we're going to look at supply in preparation for your economics examinations. Now, supply linking with demand, which we'll look at in another video of how they cross together to create market equilibrium, is an important concept again that you will need to understand for your examinations. It has roots through a whole of economics from first day you study it to the last day you ever worry about it. Now, market supply is really important to understand because once again it's a similar kind of thing as demand, but it's in this case, the definition is the supply is a quantity of a good or service that a producer is willing and able to supply into a market at a given price in a given time period. If you've seen my demand video, you'll understand how I've talked about 3-mark definition questions of this. It's exactly the same rules. So, supply is a quantity of a good or service that a producer is willing and able to supply onto a market, 1 mark, at a given price, 2 marks, in a given time period, 3 marks. Make sure you get those definitions absolutely nailed on. Now, the basic law of supply is kind of inverse to the basic law of demand. It's the fact that as prices go up, firms will be willing to supply more of a product, and as prices go down, they'll be less willing to supply the same quantity onto the market. Now, the supply curve shows this relationship in a visual way, and we will be able to then use that within the demand model as well, and we'll see some of that in a later video. So this is it, simply sloping from bottom left to upper right. This is an example of supply of coffee, for instance, at P1. P1, price 1 there, whatever that price is for a cup of coffee or a ton of coffee, depending on what we're talking about. Q1 represents how much firms are actually willing to supply at that given price. Now, if price on the market rises, firms will be much more inclined to produce and supply much more because clearly they're making a huge increase in their potential revenue and hopefully their profit from there. So we start to see a shift. So we're seeing a response to a change in price, which basically is a shift along the line. Now, in another situation, we might see what we call contraction in supply. So here we go again with coffee. Market price is P1. What might happen is, for instance, new suppliers enter the market, which we'll look at a later thing. But if just the general price on the market drops, it's less profitable for the firm, so they will reduce the quantity that they're willing to supply. In a later video, when we look at both supply and demand together, we'll look at how this can be used to manipulate pricing models and on markets and sort of where firms are able to have more control and power over pricing. But today we're just going to focus on the basis of supply. Now, there are some major things which cause shifts. So the changes in the unit cost of production, so how much it costs to actually produce a product, will impact upon supply. The more expensive it is to produce, firms may choose not to actually produce any more because it just becomes more expensive, especially if it represents a large chunk of their costs. We also see a fall in depreciation in the exchange rates, leads to prices from imported components for raw materials increasing. Therefore, once again, it goes back to point 1, changes in the unit costs of production, so it becomes more expensive and we do less of it. Advances in technology, we'll maybe see an outward shift in supplies. Products are faster, more efficient and easier to produce. If we're producing more for the same amount of time, it's obviously decreasing our unit costs overall. Then we might have entry of new producers, so new firms entering a market. We're going to see an outward shift in supply. We're going to see far more supply on the market. It increases the overall amount of products we as consumers can get. So for instance, if we have one farm producing carrots, so supply will be at a fixed level. We have a second farm suddenly start supplying carrots as well. We're going to see an increase in the overall supply on the market. Weather conditions have an impact on supply. So if we look back to my carrot farms from before, the better the weather, the better the conditions, the more carrots will be grown, so more supply will be out on the market. And then the government can have an impact as well, with taxes, subsidies and regulations. So taxes can make things more expensive, which can cause an inward shift of supply. We can see subsidies, so money being given to firms to encourage production from government. We'll see an outward shift as firms want to produce more because we're receiving money for it. And then regulations. These are going to increase costs and increase our unit costs as well. So we might see an inward shift in supply again, just because it becomes more difficult for firms to produce. So before we looked at price change, we saw how we see a shift along. In the case of changing any other variable other than price, just like in the demand, we will actually see a shift of the whole curve. So what might see here, this is an outward shift or a shift to the right of supply. This would represent an increase in the supply. So this might be because of a new entrant into a market, another business comes on. Back to my carrot example, second firm producing carrots, second farm producing carrots, and we start to see a shift along here. So same price, we have a much larger quantity of products available on the market. And vice versa, in the opposite way, if we see a contraction of supply, so let's say for instance that second carrot farm now shuts down. It will reduce the amount of supply at Q3 on the market. Price is still the same, but we have less supply available for consumers to purchase. Now, we have a quick concept of something called joint supply. This is important because this looks at the idea that sometimes if there's an increase or decrease in supply of one product, it leads to an increase or decrease in supply of a further byproduct. So, for instance, let's think about the production process. We may have a situation where we actually have like the beef market, for instance. So, for example, here is an expansion in beef production will lead to a rising market supply of beef hide. So, we kill some cows for our Sunday dinner. There's going to be a lot of skin left over, which we can often use in manufacturing of clothing. Same thing. If we have less of a supply of lamb, for instance, we want less lamb, it becomes unpopular for our Sunday dinners. Farmers are going to rear less lambs, and therefore there's going to be less wool available for the textiles industry. Wheat and straw are a good example of joint supply. If, for instance, the bakery industry requires more wheat to increase the amount of flour, therefore we're going to have more straw, which is a byproduct of wheat, and we'll end up with an increase in supply of straw on the market as well. So that was our quick video about supply. The next video I'm going to upload will be about how supply and demand work together to locate and create an equilibrium price. Okay, goodbye.